Доброго дня.
Hello, I welcome all of you. I'm Olga Tamanova, and the Media Center Ukraine in Ukraine Forum is beginning its work today. This is the 9th year of the war, 128th day since the full-scale invasion of the Russian aggressor to our land, and I thank all of you who is fighting at the informational front line and telling about truth about our fight for freedom and independence. Today our team has prepared for you the following schedule of works. At 11:30 a.m. Kyiv time, we'll be speaking about the results of the NATO summit, and we'll be welcoming the experts on this issue. At 12:30 p.m. Kyiv time, we'll be joined by Daryna, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy, and we'll be speaking about Russia's crimes against Ukraine's cultural heritage. And just now, the topic of our briefing is the first year of the land market, the results and perspectives. So here we have a very powerful team. Mykola Solskyy, Minister of the Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, is in touch with us by Zoom. Denis Bashlyk, Deputy Minister of the Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, in charge of digital development. Markiian Dmytrasevych, Deputy Minister of the Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine. Denis, Maluska, Minister of Justice of Ukraine. Bernatska, Vice President of the Notary Chamber of Ukraine. Daryna, Marchak, First Deputy Director of ProZorro.Sales, State-Owned Enterprise. And Andrii, Martyn, the Senior Project Manager of Land Reform at the Reforms Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. I would like to begin our event with a short video. Let's watch. On the 1st of July marks the first year since the market of agricultural land has been opened. This reform gave Ukrainian citizens ownership of land back. It triggered the building of transparent land relations. The opportunities afforded by this reform for the citizens, farmers and communities contribute to the growth of the country's GDP. Curb land corruption. Now the communities are responsible for the land management. Despite Russian armed aggression, the land market continues to operate, and we have acquired land rights and will defend Ukrainian land from invaders. Together we will pursue the reform while continuing to ensure food security, both for Ukraine and for the world. This is our European future. And now we're in touch with the Ministry of Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine, Mykola Solskyy. Mykola, we welcome you here. Do you hear us? Good day, Mykola. Do you hear us? Good day, yes, I hear you well. How do you hear me? Mykola, we have an interesting and pleasant meeting today. We are speaking about the first year of the land market. So, in your opinion, about your feelings, what are the outcomes? What are the results of this work? Well, the outcomes, in all of the concerns, in my opinion, are really good and important. Today, I'm sure we will be speaking about this project, and I will be speaking about that and would be happy to be present with you, but it turned out that even during the war, COVID is not cancelled. So unfortunately, we have to be in touch by Zoom. If we speak about the more common things, the first thing, what I think can be seen by everyone in the country, is that the project of the land reform is, first of all, well, it was discussed, and we definitely need to emphasize on that again. It busted all the myths connected with the land reform, so that it was done for some people from abroad who was standing with bigger suitcases to the airport. That was done for Ukrainians, and Ukrainians valued that. They have become their own owners of the land. And we can see that in the mood of the main driving force, in the most active farmers, and who are the class, I would say, as the Ukrainian national class has been shaped during the last decades. and who have actively performed and are performing during this war. It's obvious that the person who is the landowner has always protected it better than the hired person, and you can see that it's obvious. So if we speak about something emotional, as for me, this is the main thing. The land reform has been launched, it's been working without corruption, it's a bit moderate now, and we have adopted lots of laws. The vast majority of them is working. It is now brought to the maximum possible outcomes. You have the people, the presentees there, who have been joining this process, and there is something to be proud of. Everybody emphasizes on that, both the external international observers and the participants of the market themselves, the farmers themselves, and the heads of the hromadas communities who've got lots of authorities. And also it's mentioned by the citizens. In fact, we do not hear any negative remarks during the year. We can only hear that it can be connected only with the technical registration. In the beginning of the land reform process, there have been some emotions, and now they are partially a bit of silenced by the war because of the hard registration process. But in fact, it has been corrected. It's not corruption. I would say it's kind of drawbacks of the launch of land market, which were totally foreseeable, because it wouldn't be able, it wasn't here until this reform. So obviously the reform has taken place, and obviously we are working according to the market economy rules, according to which we should have worked long before, and the countries we are striving for. And the main question we may pose ourselves is why we haven't done that before, but only a year or two ago. Thank you. Thank you, and I would like to give the floor to Markiian Dmytrasevych, Deputy Minister, to speak in more details about the implementation of this reform. Please, the floor is yours. Good day, dear colleagues. As it was correctly and reasonably mentioned by Mr. Minister Solskyy, this year has shown that all of those scary stories which we were intimidated with did not take place, as well as the people who implemented the reform and understood that, first and foremost, the adoption of the law on the opening of the turnover of the arable lands has followed one and only aim: for the land to have the full-scaled, full-fledged owner, for each Ukrainian to feel freely at his or her own land, for his or her own consideration. If you are at your own land, it has become the slogan of the implementation of land reform. And we can see that this slogan does not only concern the land reform, but also the attitude of the Ukrainians towards their land, including these hard times of war, when our agrarians can simultaneously be warriors at the front line and helping the army. They began the sowing campaign, and now they begin the harvesting. During the year of the work of the land of market in Ukraine, there have been more than 150,000 of contracts. Those are not just sales contracts of lands and land plots of agricultural meaning. That could always be any other type of contract. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, before the 24th of February, we had more than 102,000 contracts, about 245,000 of hectare of the arable lands have been used, with the full, out of the full volume of the lands, approximately 320 million of hectare. We can see that these indicators are not high. As Mr. Solskyy has already mentioned, we understand that the reform has been a bit moderate and restricted. For example, if we speak about all of the countries of European Union, every year we can see the use of up to 5% of land. But we need to mention that those are not only the lands of agricultural use. We can see the outcomes. The weighted price for the hectare per hectare is 37,900 hryvnia. I understand that the figure does not impress, especially considering the current state, the military state with the currency rate. Still, mostly this is 30% higher than the starting point of the price for land. It has been expected that during 2022, the increase of the price of the land, thanks to the opening of the market, will be 15% more, but unfortunately the war makes its own adjustments. We understand that the land reform, the beginning of the turnover of arable lands and agricultural lands, is not only about sales or buying of lands, it's also stimulation of crediting under the land pledge, and we have the first contracts like that already. Before that, the landlords, agricultural landlords, which were under moratorium for more than 30 years, they did not give the opportunity for the landowners to use their right of ownership for the landlots as a financial tool. So the ownership right for the landlots were not liquid, including leading that to corruption. Unfortunately, the war brought lots of the losses for all of the spheres of life. The same happened in the land market. Some changes took place. Almost 3 months, the state registers, the state land cadastre and the state register of rights for the property was not working in Ukraine because of the obvious reasons, but the work has been restored. And since the beginning of their work during the war, we can already see the gradual restoration and recovery, the activization at the land market. During the first week, we had 300 of contracts. During the second week, 900. During the third week, almost 1,700. The experts of the Kyiv School of Economy have also conducted the assessment of our losses. Unfortunately, we can see that the direct expenses and losses, which also concern the landlords, are approximately $4.3 billion. The significant part of these losses is because of the mining and demolishing of fields. That is the arable and agricultural lands, which could be the component of this market. And also I would like to come back to the topic of the conclusions of the work of land market. During the first year, there have been more than 88,000 sales contracts awarded, or totally more than 7 billion hryvnia. We understand and we see that because of the Russian aggression and the beginning of the full-scale war, more than 51,000 of contracts, sale contracts, unfortunately did not take place, and the landowners did not get approximately 4.2 billion hryvnia. It's also would be reasonable to tell what's planned for the future. The turnover of lands, as I already mentioned, is not only sales. We do understand that this could be the stimuli for other spheres, first and foremost for the sphere of the economy and agrarian and industrial complex. So what can it lead to? The further actions and the development of the land market. First of all, that's an opportunity to invest money in the land. What am I speaking about? First of all, about the multi-year sowing. Of course, we understand that it is without the ownership right, just for the rent. Well, if you just have the rent, not a single owner would invest thousands of dollars per hectare to have the multi-year crops, the revenue of which will be gained in 3, 4, or 5 years of work. To support this project of gardening, the government has already adopted the support program for the development of gardening. I think you know about that already. Another point which is as well important, and which is the follow-up after the turnover and the opportunity to get the land into the private ownership, not only rent, is melioration. Now, the ministry is working on that actively to launch the projects of irrigation and melioration. Unfortunately, we need to come back to the assessment of the Kyiv School of Economy about the losses. We do understand that the big amount of lands are located, of meliorated lands are in Kherson and Zaporizhia regions. Unfortunately, there is the situation which you know about, so we'd like to begin this process of the recovery of melioration, beginning with Odessa region. Why the land market is so important for that? Because this is the matter of the organization of melioration and scale. If we need to irrigate, we need to invest huge sums of money into hectare, and the opportunity to buy land, to become an owner, and to invest money is in the necessary precondition for that. Which problems did we see during the functioning of the land market? As it was mentioned by Minister, in the majority of cases those are technical issues. I think Mr. Denis Maluska will tell about that additionally. Still, I would like to drive your attention to the fact that in October last year, several months after the launch of the land market, there has been introduced a certain law draft 6199, which has been developed with the Ministry of Justice and the Notary Chamber, basing upon the problems which emerged in the process of the contracts registration for sales of the land plots of agricultural use. And, as we hope, today, in the Parliament, in Verkhovna Rada, this law will be adopted. So, what do we see? We can see some of the issues emerging, and we are trying to actively and proactively respond them and correct them, including the legislative way. So what would I like to tell you again? I would like to wish all of us for the consequences of the war, and this war to be over as soon as possible with our victory, of course. Our farmers should come back to work to their own lands, would happily use it. If it's necessary, they could sell or buy lands, they could just freely use it. And I do hope we will meet in some time after analyzing the figures which I just mentioned as the outcome of the first year of the land market, and those figures would be much more optimistic in the future and much more influential, impacting onto our economy. And also I'd like to say that we will go on analyzing the practice of the land market functioning, and we will take away and get rid of any bureaucratic obstacles, including through the digitalization of all of the possible services. And I think that Denis Bashlyk will tell about that better. Denis, please, we do invite you here and give you the floor. This is the Deputy Minister of the Agrarian Policy and Food of Ukraine in charge of digital development, digital transformation. So I think not a single reform is possible without digitalization. How did you manage to use those tools? Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that it was mentioned about the myths before the opening of the land market. I personally always remember the most scary, the scariest myth. So when the market is open, the foreigners will come and they will steal Ukrainian land. Today, thanks to our defenders, we can see what happens with the foreigners who try to take Ukrainian land and to steal it. So, in fact, the Ukrainian case of opening of the land market is rather unique, because it would be impossible to take some European model or American model and to use it in the Ukrainian reality. During the days of the moratorium, we have formed certain peculiarities of the land relations which we needed to settle. So, in fact, we managed to do that. We can see, as it was mentioned by Mr. Minister, there haven't been any negatives. There were some of the technical issues, but as of today, they will be solved, and they are being solved, including digitalization. So you need to understand that the land market is the part of the bigger land reform, thanks to which the land relations during the year have become much more transparent than they used to be. One of those factors is that since the 1st of July 2021, that is the first day of the opening of the land market, Ukraine is publishing fully all of the data about the land market, that is how much of land has been sold, what's the average price, region by region, district by district, and in every cadastre number. What does it mean? That the state doesn't have anything to hide from their citizens, the investors, the farmers and landowners. There is the tool for the objective decision making, for the understanding what's the fair price, in which part, or maybe even at the level of certain land lots. And also I would like to mention that even under the conditions of the martial law, we have restored the work of the state land cadastre. Unfortunately, I cannot speak about everything, but the state cadastre has been standing against the cyber attacks and is fully operating with certain restrictions, but those restrictions concern exceptionally the issues of security which exist today under the conditions of war. If we are speaking about the further plans, there have been the law on the national infrastructure adopted, and I think that this is the next stage for the development of transparency and accessibility for the information which the state owns. That is, we will open all the data, not only about the land lots, but also about the resources, all the natural resources, all the city building data, information which we have as of today. So all of that will be unified in one portal which will be opened for everybody. Today, unfortunately, because of the security, the access is restricted, but after our victory, everything will be open. If we speak about the access of communities, gromadas, and the use of the lands by communities which they got within the land reform, I would like to mention that 100 of communities have already had the transition process to the transparent governance. 75 of them have published the data about their territories in the open geoportals, which means that approximately 3 million hectares of lands are now accessible for the transparable public monitoring, for the decision-making at the level of the communities and gromadas. So in fact, the decisions based on factual data. I'd like to thank our partners, our foreign partners, especially USAID Agro, USAID, who have developed the pilot project on the level of several communities, who are now successfully scaled for the whole territory of Ukraine. But we need to understand that the work on the improvement of the land market is not over. As Markiian Dmytrasevych has mentioned, the law draft 6199 is rather important. It will be adopted rather soon. It is settling all the technical issues which used to exist in the process of the registration of sales contracts of the land. So, also I'd like to mention the work of the state land cadastre, that is the implementation of the principle of exterritoriality for all of the services which we can find in the state cadastre. It is done to create relations between the consumer, the landowner, and the land user with the state, and to make those relations more transparent and objective. So we don't have any contact between the state official and the services consumer. Soon we have the plans to launch the State Agrarian Register. This is the unified platform where we'll accumulate information about the agrarian producers, but we'll tell about that later. Thank you. Now we give the floor to Denis Maluska, the Minister of Justice of Ukraine. So, Denis, according to your understanding, is the land reform successful? Because as far as I understand, your institution has faced the biggest obstacles while it was implementing. Yes, there were lots of issues, but in fact, all of us who studied Ukrainian literature at school, we understood that for a Ukrainian, the land is more than just a land. For us, the land is not the same as the land for instance, our Western European partners, though they also, if they are landowners, they live rather well. It's the key for richness and the financial resources. Okay. That was a kind of a sacred ritual. I'm really thankful to the Minister of Agrarian Policy and especially for Mr. Solskyy, who was the head of the committee while the opening of the land market. Those were titanic efforts because that was an incredibly complicated story of the fight with the myth, which has been created during lots of years, that the land cannot be sold, that it's something sacred, that it's not just the ownership right object, so it will be stolen. So I'd like to congratulate all of us, because this is the first anniversary, which is the first and key proof, the evidence that the myths around the land market are still myths. No one stole anything, no one concentrated anything, and no one brought the Ukrainian land abroad. So this is the first and the most important aspect. But again, the land market has instantly been a product of compromise. So undoubtedly, they first had the liberal approach, which, according to the initiative of the Cabinet of Ministers and lots of liberal MPs about this initiative, they had fewer restrictions than it turned out to be, because it's the product of the compromise. And as for the land market, we had lots of restrictions since the beginning, lots of checks and monitors, lots of diverse restrictions, both for the subjects and the square and the types of objects you can own. So it finally brought to the situation that when the buyer and the seller came to the notary, he had to check everything, here, there, everywhere, and after several days of work, you will be finally able to assess whether the person can buy the land lot or not. In fact, that's what has become the key obstacle, or I wouldn't see the obstacle, the key issue for the market to work since the first days as quickly and efficient as we'd like it to, and for the contracts to be done in a whiff. But, in fact, my colleagues, both the Ministry of Justice and Ministry of the Agrarian Policy coped with this task. The system has been working. It's working efficiently. The sales have started, and this wonderful and bright development of the land market has been stopped only, as lots of other points, by the full-scale invasion of Russian Federation on the 24th of February. The issue was hard and complication. It is still hard, but what can the land market show? That our citizens are still optimistic. Because any investments into land can definitely be done by the person who is sure in the future of the state, who is sure that the business, the agrarian business, the agricultural business could always stay here and it will always be profitable. And if we compare the figures, now in the register we document about the ownership rights. In average, during December, per day we registered approximately 332 contracts on sales of real estate, and December was peaceful. Yes, there were some scary stories that Armageddon is approaching, but still, the investors were not that sure. Still, we had 332 transactions per day. Now, during the active combats, we have approximately 65 transactions of sales and buying per day. Yes, the decrease took place, but because of the objective reasons, taking into account the occupied lands and the lands under combats, we can instantly exclude this huge part of the land. So those who are dealing with agriculture, they are still optimistic. They are buying land, they are investing money in it, and the transactions are still ongoing. As for the peculiarities of the work during the war, my colleague has mentioned we really stopped all the key registers after the beginning of the warfare just to understand which territory is will be affected most of all, which less, where we can restore the work of the registered, where it should be restricted, and where we need to block it and to ban them. So that is why our key registers connected with the land market have been functioning at the beginning of May. Well, what do I mean? We lifted the restrictions and made broader access to them in the beginning of May. During the previous period, we blocked access of the users to the registers, not to allow excessive hacker attacks or abuses or the access of the enemy to the data of the registry. So the registers are saved, all the data is saved, the access to the real estate operations can have the very narrow circle of notaries. We thought to block the access for everyone, for those who have the feeling that this is the last day of Pompeii, that they can do whatever they want, re-register, steal, break. It's not true. The first psychological state of anxiety of the notaries vanished. They understood that everything is under control. Whoever violates the ownership right will bear responsibility. The profession is saved and there is some sense to deal with it. In fact, it is still profitable. So when psychologically the situation has come to balance, back to balance, we restored access, in fact, for everyone except, if we speak about notaries, except to those who have the history or of sanctions from the Ministry of Justice, for instance, because of certain complaints. So among the notaries, the overall number of the 6.5 thousand, now the access towards the register and the contracts have approximately 4,700 notaries. In fact, the number is substantial, taking into consideration the restrictions on the territories and the decrease of the number of transactions. It's more than enough to provide the efficient market of land in all of the territories. There is multitude of technical issues which emerged and are still emerging and will emerge. The majority of them will vanish after the next stage of the land reform, when some of the restrictions will be lifted. And I believe into the more liberal land market, because during this year the majority of myths have been busted and we can move on to the civilized European country. And also I would like to remind that the opening of the land market was the consequence of the decision of the European Human Rights Court, which witnessed that the restrictions for the arable lands is the violation of the European Human Rights Convention. So we also closed our gestalt. We reported that we have already performed the decision of the European Human Rights Court. I am happy to congratulate you with the holiday. Well, of course, we will not celebrate because we have the tragic events, but still this is the victory, and I can congratulate my colleagues. I thank you, and I'd like to give the floor to Daryna Marchak, First Deputy Director of ProZorro.Sales, state-owned enterprise. Daryna, let's speak about the opportunity of e-auctions now for the landowners and the ones who would like to buy it. Hello, dear colleagues, thank you. The colleagues who created the reform has mentioned a lot. I will be speaking about some of the technical aspects which we consider to be rather important. That is the fundamental impact of land reform. From the one hand, this is the land moratorium, and on the other hand, as it was mentioned by Denis, Bashlyk, digitalization of the procedures. So together, those two components have provided the high level of efficiency, transparency, and trust to what is happening. One of the elements of the land reform has become the implementation of e-auctions for the sales and rent of all of the landlords of the state and communal form of ownership, and the government, according to the decree, has appointed the administrator of the system of e-bids, the state-owned enterprise ProZorro.Sales. Through our system, it is compulsory to have the contracts by all of the landlords owners of the state and communal ownership, in spite of the type of those landlords, and also, if they wish, it can be used by the citizens all over the country, the citizens and legal entities. So the first lots in the system emerged in the beginning of October 2021, and in the end, of October, the system has had the first bids. So altogether, as any market which is ongoing through substantial transformation, including procedures, we needed some time for the market to begin its functioning, but we could see that adaptation of the market to the new rules of the game has taken place quickly. In November 2021, we have seen the substantial intensification of contracts on sales, buying and rent of land lots. If we look at the statistical data in the dynamics, before the war, we could see monthly a tendency for the increase of number of the organizers, that is sellers in the system, and also the number of the announced biddings. And the successful sales was approximately 50%. That's every second auction was finalized with the awarded contract. As for the increase of the prices, the bidding which took place in November to February showed that the land market needed the reform and openness. For instance, at the auction of the rent of the land lots, the price was increasing in average for 274%, that is 4 times. And the average increase was from 40 million hryvnia to 150 million hryvnia. Still, at the auction of sales, the price increased. We have the details on the sales auctions of the land. At the sales auctions, the price was increasing approximately per 51%, from the average price of 145 million to 220 million. So, in our opinion, the price of the land lots increased because of digitalization of the sales. First of all, because the information about the bidding has become accessible. Secondly, because now the citizens, the legal entities, can conveniently find the lot, file application, submit an application, take part in the bidding, and they can do it even using a cell phone, which has sped up and made this procedure much more transparent. And also, one of the peculiarities of our system is that we are working with the private marketplaces and platforms all over the country who know the buyers in each of the regions and the sellers in spite of location, so it allows to reach the target audience as quickly as possible. Out of these important tendencies, I can mention that during the whole period we could see the small percentage of cancellation of bidding, 8% from the total quantity. But the main reason of the cancellation were mistakes of the sellers while registering the lots. And according to our opinion, soon we can expect the decrease of the number of cancelled biddings, because the sellers will have knowledge, expertise and skills how to register the lots. And also, what's important, that the peak of the activity of the organizers and the sellers of the land lots, and also the rent, was in February 2022. And in February there has been announced 1,660 biddings, which had to take place in March. But the beginning of the war has really impacted the market, and Mr. Markiian has already mentioned about that before. So in this situation, at this slide you can see the overall statistical data, which is average for the whole market, for all of the biddings on sales and rent. But when the war started, in fact, we appointed the task. In spite of everything, we should provide the stable and continuous work of the system, because the regions which are now far from the front line, they also needed the financial resources and also the rent of the land lots or the sales of the agricultural lands. It is still a stable resource of revenue, even during the war times. So, of course, when the war started, the percentage of the cancelled auctions has increased. That is 27% in March to June. The reason are just the multitude of factors of martial law, and also we have the decrease of the percentage of successful biddings to 4 to 10% in comparison with 50% before. And of course, we had the decrease of the volumes of lots. In particular, as for the rent, this decrease was more than 20 times. So we can see still the continuation of the activity in the biddings of the land, also during the war times. In particular, the rent market is still functioning. Even in the critical month of March, 40% of the biddings announced in February were successful. The increase of the price was 4 times approximately. Now the situation as of now is normalizing, and the percentage of successful biddings is approximately 40%, which is not far from the pre-war level. The increase of the price still at the biddings is in average 3.5 times. Thus, we can see that the work of the market is slowly recovering. As of today, the system is taking the applications for the participants in 319 auctions. The starting price at these auctions is more than 300 million hryvnia. The biddings are announced for today, even with the period of autumn, of conduction in autumn. In particular, separately, I'd like to import several points about different participants of the system. So you can see the activity of physical persons. The peculiarity of Ukrainian economy is that the citizens do not have the habit to the auctions as the way to buy property. In particular, it concerns the land market. Still, we can see that even the private persons have begun the use, have started to use the e-auctions to find the fair market price for their assets. In particular, we had 84 lots published in the system by the citizens of Ukraine, the private persons, with an overall square of 250 hectares. So thanks to these biddings, the starting price of 81 million hryvnia, but the price of sales and rate has increased to 92 million hryvnia. Also, the important element of the work is the work of the private executioners in the land biddings. My colleagues have already mentioned that there are some of the collisions in legislation which make the land biddings complicated by the private performers much more complicated still. Even for the state participants, the biddings are taking place in the system, and the average increase of the price is sometimes higher than in the land biddings altogether. So, according to our opinion, the positive is that all of the land biddings are taking place according to the single procedure. So, in fact, the enforcement officers, though they got used to work in the different systems, they still get used gradually to the new reality. I think that the question about the sales and the work of the enforcement officers will be also mentioned by my colleague from the Association of Private Enforcement Officers. I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope we will see the further recovery on land biddings in the future, and the indicators of the biddings will come back to the pre-war level, or maybe even will be improving during these times. Thank you. Let us come back to the work of the notaries. I'd like to give the floor to Inna Bernatska, Vice President of the Notary Chamber of Ukraine. Inna, please, the floor is yours. Let us speak about how the notaries feel under new conditions, the conditions of the wartime. What about the implementation of the land reform, please? So what can the notary do for Ukraine? Just to work with a high quality and to work a lot. And what can we do during the war? We can work even 2 times more at saving lives of our own and of our relatives and the people who are now in the offices during our work. The Notary Chamber of Ukraine had practical experience of the work on the sales of land lots before 2002. After 2002, there were some of the several procedures selling land lots to the foreigners. However, we had the nice experience of work with the land lots. We can sum it up, and if we take the year since the moment of the opening of the land market, for us it's a big and important event, because we could have high reputational losses if we did not cope with the task of the state. Out of the 12 months, we have one stage since the 1st July to the 24th of February, 7 months, in fact, of the high quality and full-scale work. The full work of the land market in Ukraine. We can see that European countries did not have those restrictions. They have been developed during 2006, since the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. They have the guarantee for the land ownership. And now we don't have only to launch the land market, but for each owner who has the right to own the land plot, we need to provide its status. The next stage is 3 months. We say this is the gray zone, beginning with the 24th of February till the first decade of May, when the notaries have begun their work with the registers. Yes, the state registers were disconnected, removed for the state property, for the cadasters, and we could not work with the state property with them. The notaries were working during all of this time, and the citizens were really interested in the procedures about land plots. They went to the gray zone as they used to do that during the period of time where we didn't have the land market. This was the small number, but they were just usual certificates, some previous contracts of sales, about the intentions, and any other documents which are either not full-scale or negligible. But the people had such a need, and it showed that if you close the work of the notaries even for a day, it can become very hard for the population and for the economy. The second stage has been finalized, and now we are taking all of those citizens and what they signed, what they awarded, we make it legal. So we also register the sales contracts for the land plots, the loans and money loans contracts and other operations. So it is reflected. All of this information should be reflected in the e-registers and state registers. And the third stage is the beginning of May of 2022. For 2 months, almost 2 months, we are working, if we can say, under the conditions of war. More or less we're working at the full-fledged regime. We cannot certificate the notary contracts about the land plots. There are some of the technical issues, there are some of the discrepancies, but we are working, and the statistical data, the dynamics witnesses about the increase of the number of operations and transactions with the land plots. Ukraine has approximately 6,600 notaries. 4,150 of them have been connected to the system. This number of the notaries are ready, and they activated all of their work to provide the work of the land market and the transactions with the land plots. That is why all of the notaries have had the repetitive, well, I wouldn't say check, it was formal check in the Ministry of Justice, because we submitted our applications, we informed there was a certain procedure to see that the notary is not abroad, that he or she is at the workplace. We checked whether everything is okay with them, and also when they connected to the system, there has been such a procedure to have access to the information and to make it well protected. Yes, it was hard, but it is formalized. If the warriors are protecting our land with the weapons, we need to stand at the legal front line. As for the land market, I would like to say today the following, that the notaries are really very fair working with the land market. This is the whole idea for them. This is the check for maturity. Why did the notary cope with that? Our story began on the 24th of May last year at the Presidential Forum. Till the 1st of July, we had a month and several days to train the notaries to have enough of the skills of the huge amount of legislation, the new tools and legal constructions which the civil legislation, the land legislation never knew before. We needed to train, to show, to connect, and to provide the slow launch of the land market, to have the harmonized work of the complicated procedures of the protection of the law and all of the types of laws which our landowners and land users have. It was really hard to use the tool of the check of the origin of money, because our society is still not ready, does not know how, is only training for a year to how to register, to approve the origin of money used to buy the land, and it is really super important. What has been working? We had the staff potential because we brought up lots of new notaries. Additionally, every notary trained his or her assistants, the staff. The material technical base during the 30 years is rather good, and the kind of mobility as for the changes in the legislation. And of course, from behalf of all of our notaries, I would like to say that this reform, in fact, can be an example of the reforms in the state, which shows the nice communication, and it worked and functioned in the harmonious way and with high quality, because we had communication of the notary chamber with the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Agrarian Policy, with the Commission, and with State Geocadastre. That was the daily work 24/7. We have been working at the training platforms, in chats, in the social media, Telegram channels. We instantly had Q&A sessions from the simplest to the hardest points. And when we coped to work with the sales contracts and we began to have them in the proper way, then we began to implement the land auctions into work, and we were getting ready for the development of another part of land market, that is sales, and also the rights of the land, that is rent and so on, and also the pledge and mortgage. So again, in 7 months we've done a lot. We have created our own work, in fact, according to the principle of the one-stop window. That is, first we prepare the documents. The notary has the maximum of tools to prepare the documents for the citizens. Now the notary can take the certificate about the assessment, and also the abstract or the excerpt from the state cadastre. He or she certifies the contract and provides the state registration. That is why I'd like to say that one more important point. Since the beginning of August last year, we took part in the creating of the law draft 6199, and we are really waiting to have the proper simplification of those procedures for our citizens, that the Parliament will support this law draft, and we will be working simplifying the work of the residents of the rural areas, getting rid of some of the collisions. We are going on with our work. I thank our colleagues and partners. I thank the notaries. And dear citizens, please be cautious and take care about your legal rights titles for your land plots. And here is Andrii Martyn, Senior Project Manager, Land Reform at the Reforms Delivery Office of the Cabinet of Ministers. Andrii, what are the further stages for the development of land reform? Well, first I will speak about the accomplishments which we have during the year, but not only about the turnover of agricultural lands, because we need to understand that the land reform in Ukraine was comprehensive. It concerned not only the agricultural lands in the economic turnover, but also the real land decentralization. Finally, Hromadas communities got an opportunity to fully use their lands. We have the substantial decrease in the corruption in land relations, because we simplified all the procedures which before had lots of complaints to implement implement the ownership rights for the land. So this gives us an opportunity to state that the land reform added transparency. It added the land relations, what we really have been waiting for, the citizens and gromadas. Instead of one of the most corrupt spheres of governance, the land relations are becoming gradually normal, and they don't lead to any complaints. Well, of course, during the war, lots of things have changed. In fact, if there was no war, we would meet in May, because in May we had the full functioning of the legislation about land decentralization and deregulation. The gromadas, since May, got an opportunity to provide land control on the use and protection of lands. Lots of points could be implemented connected with the further improvement of functioning of the cadastre system, but unfortunately, the 25th of May, the cadastre system was disconnected. For several months, the Ukrainian citizens could not get those services, and of course it created some of the obstacles, because in spite of the war, we needed to register the legacy, the heritage, and also we needed to register the business activities. So of course it suspended the market activities. Since May and June, we are recovering the functioning of the cadastre system. Of course, we don't see the public cadastre card. It is disconnected. The reason is simple. The aggressor is mostly using the maps of the 80s, and we don't have to help him giving the very precise cartographic data from the state land cadastre. Simultaneously, now, we begin the restoration of the functioning of the cadastre system. In January of the current year, we had 147,000 of application for the registration of land plots. During June, we have 18,000 of land lots. So this sphere is beginning its work again. As of today, the Security Service of Ukraine is beginning the check of the landowners to provide them special permits during the war times, because people have access to the critically important information, the maps, the data of the cadastre, so it will deblock the functioning of the market for us to be able to provide the citizens the timely and high-quality services. And also I would like to mention that today we face new challenges. Lots of lands will be polluted with the ammunition because of the combats, so we do hope that soon, during the next years, we'll be able to demine those territories to have minimal risks for the use of the agricultural equipment, or just staying at the lands, because it can be tragic if the lands and the fields are not demined. And besides that, the lands are just violated. There are lots of funnels because of the hard ammunition. We have to recultivate the lands, and it should be done appropriately for the Ukrainian lands not to lose their qualities, and for them to be used efficiently, and to guarantee food security, not only for our state, but for the whole world. Thank you. I thank you, and I would like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister for the Q&A session for the journalists. Dear colleagues, if you've got any questions, could you raise your hand and take the mic? Denis, Markiian, please come to the stage. I understand there will be some questions, as our minister had to leave us, so please. I've got the question. Oksana Polishuk, Ukrinform. I've got the question to Markiian. You've mentioned the price of 1 hectare of land, that is almost 38,000 hryvnia. And you said that the war introduces its own adjustments into the pricing of the land market. So according to your forecasts, during the war, will the price change? Or maybe it will increase? What could it be after the war, according to your forecasts? Thank you for the question. First of all, about the war. It's obvious that the proposal won't be as much as it used to be before the war. Considering the inflation processes which are taking place because of the crisis, this average price of 37,600 is not that attractive as it used to be before the war. So we are expecting that the market offer will be lower, but still there are some of the factors which we understand. We have the territories which has combats, we have temporarily occupied territories, and we have more or less safe territories in the center and in the west of Ukraine. So the forecast about these regions, these land plots, is still more optimistic. I think that the price there will be increasing. Thank you. Any other questions? Oleg Pachon, as the war has lots of hues. One of those hues is to save 50 million of wheat, which our land can give. There are lots of factors which witness that the logistics, I don't want to say that this is sabotage, but still lots of those millions will stay. And God forbid they begin to rot. Nobody knows how much will be sown of the winter crops in the autumn. We don't have anything to sow with, and nobody knows the price of the land in the spring. This is not the military factor, this is the economic factor. So I think, Denis, that as of today, we need to create the model to make the producer closer to the land, to the wheat, the bigger and smaller holdings, what to deal with that. But where is the state? What about the model to create it, to show it? Here we have the mill, here we have something else. It should be digital. It should be the system of big data. Whatever you may call it, it could be the system of the national security. Thank you. Thank you. Let me answer this comment. Yes, you're really right. And the food security as of today, as it was mentioned by a minister, the harvest and the yield today is under threat. The 3 next harvests are under threat, but it does not mean that the state has only the measures to save what we have today and to take it out. In fact, as of today, we have the comprehensive approach about the future harvests and the following one. And we do those measures at the level of the stimulation of the construction of temporary and permanent capacities for preservation, and also to solve all of the logistical issues. You're right. The digitalization could help in this sphere, and as of today, several mechanisms are being implemented. As we know, there is the program with the canal, which is being solved thanks to our European colleagues, thanks to digitalization of this process, to stop this problem, the traffic jam, I would say, which is happening there, and it will be done in other directions. Some of the directions cannot be shown publicly. I mean the demolished and the new capacities for preservation, the warehouses, but we go on with this work, and the government takes care not only about some separate problems, but the comprehensive way. Thank you, and the last question? Halina Kvitka, the newspaper Voice of Ukraine. I have the question to all of the participants. Which issues need to be settled at the level of the legislation? In particular, Denis Bashlyk, could you say which law drafts you are working on with the Committee of the Parliament on Digital Transformation? Then Markiian Dmytrasevych, out of your words, the moratorium was for more than 30 years. Maybe we need to come back to the sources, to the history, how the land reform was implemented more than 30 years ago, and the key points which we had during this way. And more of a practical question to all of the notaries, or I don't know, maybe Andrii Martyn could tell. If the person is not in Ukraine, how can the person sell the land without his or her presence, in particular through ProZorro system? Thank you. Please try to be very short, we are out of time. In a nutshell, as for digitalization of procedures, you're right. Today we saw that the paperback procedures are not only inefficient, but also they are dangerous for the users. So we are working actively, as I mentioned. The State Agrarian Register has become one of the key spheres for the development of digitalization in the agrarian sector. Thank you. Halina, thank you for the question. I cannot answer in the short way, but we need to understand that this process of the ownership right of this citizen of Ukraine, the person who is working on the land, long before, has taken place long before today. We understand that it was socialistic property, and those processes are ongoing still since those times. Really, in the modern history of Ukraine, there was an interesting moment when the moratorium was not working. But at this stage, our parliamentarians somehow wanted to close this window of opportunities because of some reasons. I'm happy that a year ago the law has become acting and we are getting rid of those remnants of the Soviet reality. Thank you that you took part in our event, and I remind you, dear journalists, that at 11:30 Kyiv time we'll be speaking about the